This is Sarah Hendricks with Randolph-Macon College as part of our Living Legacies oral history. The date is May 20th, 2009, and I'm here with Curtis Saunders, class of 48, his nephew, Rob Saunders, class of 79, Laura Doherty, and as I said, Sarah Hendricks. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. Mr. Saunders, how did you first hear about Randolph-Macon College? When did you learn about it?
Through the church. And of course, my father went there too, and from him. That was my first. And of course, we had quite a few people in our church that went around Randolph-Macon, such as Jimmy McLemore and Big Tom Birdsong and the whole crowd. There were quite a few of them that went to Randolph-Macon.
And your father was class of?
1920.
And did he graduate?
No, he did not. He and Big Tom Birdsong were in the same class.
And you grew up in
Suffolk,
Virginia.
Right.
So when was your first time coming to campus? Do you remember the first time you were on the campus?
First time was when I was a freshman. That was my first visit.
And what were your impressions?
Well, the campus at that particular time was not in the greatest shape. In fact, when I moved into my room, I had to go out on the ground and find some brick bats to keep the dresser from drifting across the floor. So the floors in the dormitory were not that great.
Which dormitory was it?
It was in, I can't remember now. The one that was fixed up last.
Thomas Branch?
Right.
And did they provide the furniture, or did you have to bring your own?
No, it was provided.
It was.
The lady from Eastern Shore came in, my roommate came in, Billy Edwards, and she came in, took one look at the room and started crying. I told her everything's going to be fine.
So you heard about it through the church. When you got there, how did you afford a Randolph-Macon education? Did you work on campus?
Yes, I did. I worked in cleaning and pressing place over there across the railroad track for the first year. Then I worked for Dr. Bullington in the lab for the company for one next year. And then after that, I was on a GI Bill.
So was there a break in between your years of school that you went into the Marines?
Yeah, I left after my freshman year. I went in the Marine Corps in 1942. And then came back in 46.
Finished up in 48.
Right.
So when you got there as a freshman, you were only there that 1 year.
Right.
Did you declare a major at that point? Or
well, I was taking, when I first went there, I was going to be a minister. I was pre-ministerial. I started there.
He says with a chuckle.
After 4 years in the Marine Corps, I had to give up.
What was that like, having 1 year and then going away for 4 years? I imagine that was an incredibly transformative experience. What was it like to come back as a man, with a bunch of 18-year-olds?
Well, there were so many that came back also. So that I guess probably 30% of our campus were returning veterans.
Were most of those people who had started at Randolph-Macon and then had?
Yeah, right. Had started and then come back.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
For the Marine Corps?
Right.
And what prompted you to do
that? That's the next question.
Boy from VMI, Bobby Osborne, and I decided that we would go in the Marine Corps, and we went down to the list, and he chickened out and went in the Army, and I went in the Marine Corps.
Okay, before you enlisted, when you arrived on campus as a freshman, did you participate in activities? Did you join a fraternity or?
Right. I was doing Phi Delta at that time. And we had quite a few guys there because we had Luther White was one of my fraternity brothers, and so was Jack Russell, and
That was a motley
quite
crew.
quite a few of them, and one from Northern Neck, been so active up there. Can't think of his name now to save my life. But
And Dad was a member of Phi Delta as well, right?
when he came, right.
Right.
That's right.
Were y'all, and is
No,
it
no,
okay for
please,
me to-
please.
Yeah.
Were y'all ever at school at the same time?
Your dad, not yeah,
Right, okay.
yeah. His last, he came in '47, I think, didn't he?
I'm not
He
sure.
left high school. He came in '47,
Okay,
so he was there for 1 year when I was there.
okay.
So he was a legacy at that point. Bob Saunders, that's who went by
Right,
Bob, right?
right.
It's class of 50 is Rob Saunders' father.
Right, right.
And of course, Curtis Saunders' brother.
I'm not sure what class he was because he did the same thing. He went for a year. He went for
Right.
a year to VMI, and then he came to Randolph-Macon,
Right.
and then he took some time off to work to raise money to go back to school,
Right.
and he was drafted. So he was in the Army for 3 years and then came
Right.
back. So it's hard to say what his class year was.
But I think he was 50, if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken.
And what was membership in the fraternity like? Was it did men live in the fraternity building?
Lived in a fraternity house, yeah. But well, not the freshmen, but the upperclassmen lived in a fraternity house. But see, for my freshman year, we started out that year with something that was 1941. Yeah, in 1942 it was, because we started out that year with about 100 students and we ended up with about 35 because so many of them went into service. And then they brought in the Army Reserves,
You're talking about 100 students in the whole school?
in the whole school.
Okay.
And we ended up with about 32 in the whole school. And beat Richmond 7-6 with 32 members.
And in the fraternity house, you lived there and you also ate there, is that correct? You had a woman
No.
cook there?
No, we ate at Mary Blackwell's,
Okay.
which was a house on the corner across from Thomas Branch, I think.
And all students ate there or just the members of Phi Delta?
No, it was just a lot of folks ate that, and they ate at different places.
So there was no dining hall?
No, there wasn't any dining hall.
That was run by the
No,
college?
They were called boarding houses,
Yeah.
weren't they?
yeah. And Mary Blackwell she was the niece, I think, of Dr. Blackwell, who had been president of Randolph-Macon. She was a character.
And she employed students too.
Oh yeah,
didn't
she did. Yeah, she had a lot of students she employed to help. She had great biscuits. You could, if you threw those at somebody, they were in trouble.
Well, tell us about your relationships that first year. Who was your roommate, or were there professors who you got to know well? Or
Well, there was a boy named Billy Edwards who was my roommate, and then he left, I think, and I ended up with that year with Jim Camp, who later played football for Carolina, and Jim Pruitt, who later played basketball for Duke, and there were three of us in the big room.
the bowling alley room?
Yeah, that's right. Three of us were there, and that was an experience too.
It was a big dorm room, you mean?
Yeah, a huge room.
And is that why they called it the
I
bowling
think it was
alley?
long and thin.
Yeah.
It was one of those on the side wing that I guess faces west, on the western side of the building. There must have been four of them,
Yeah, there were. I think that's right.
but it's my
But that-
impression that's where mischief was made.
It's a good thing that room can't talk too. I can tell you that now.
Why do you say that?
Well, because the other boys were very active.
The other boys.
The other boys, yeah.
You were the ministerial student.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, were you a member of Clericus?
I was when my
You were the
first year. Right. Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was fine.
Was that usual for students to be members of both Clericus and a fraternity?
No.
Okay.
In fact, some of the members of Clericus were members of, I can't think it was it wasn't a fraternity, but it was a club they had, but I can't remember what, Commons Club or something like that. But they were not members of fraternity. I was kind of an outlaw of that.
Were you involved in sports your freshman year?
No,
Okay.
no, not my freshman year. I did go out there for a football team, but I didn't. I was just I was there. That's all.
So you then, so after your freshman year was when you enlisted in the Marines.
Right.
And during those 4 years, I mean, you must have, I assume, traveled. I mean,
Yeah, I traveled.
where did you?
Yeah, I traveled all right. At first I went to Paris Island and finished at Paris Island, and then went to Camp Lejeune and was there and volunteered to go into Marine Paratrooper, so I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Then they did away with the Marine Paratroopers and sent us on to Quantico, so that's where we finished, got our lieutenant's bars.
And where did, that was during the time of World War II.
Right.
So were you sent to places in the war?
Yeah, well, I went from Quantico, went to California, Oceanside, and taught out there for about 6 months, and then went to Guam, and from Guam to Saipan, Saipan to Okinawa, and Okinawa to Japan. Now I volunteered to stay an extra year in Japan because I couldn't get back in Randolph-Macon until I couldn't get home until October, so it would be too late to get back in school, so I volunteered to stay an extra year so I could come back in September.
And this was towards the end of the war, right?
This was the end of the war, right?
At the end of the
So
war.
you were in Japan at the end of the war.
No. We were in the islands at the end of the war, but we moved up to Japan. Right, we went into Nagasaki about I think it was 6 weeks after they dropped the atomic bomb, and we moved in on Kyushu, and it was people walking around with flesh hanging off of them and everything else. It was a terrible situation.
And you were just trying to help the people there and to
we moved,
organize things.
Right. Of course, I ended up destroying all the coastal guns that they had on Kyushu. They had all these German artillery pieces on railroad cars that they could move around in a way that we made our landing. We would have lost 1 million men had we landed in Kyushu.
Mm.
But they really had that thing fortified. So that was one of my jobs, to destroy all the coastal guns.
How would you do that?
Well, with black powder and nitroglycerin. That was I had a crew, and so I had 2 old Japanese trucks, and on the back of those Japanese flatbed trucks, I had nitroglycerin in these 5-gallon jars, in cradles. And so the boys, whoever got drunk on Saturday night, the whole next week I'd make them ride on that nitroglycerin truck. So that was their punishment. So that was the way we handled it. So we didn't have a whole lot of drunks.
when you came back to Randolph-Macon in the September, that
Right.
was September of 1946,
6, right.
1946, and you were entering your sophomore year.
Right.
I mean, what was that transition like?
Well, it was quite a transition. It really was, because, of course, you know, I'd been pretty much on my own and could do as I pleased, and all of a sudden I was back in the regiment. Of course, Dr. Simpson put it very succinctly. Beginning of my senior year, he was a friend of my father's. He called me in. He said, "Curtis said, you've been playing. You've had a good time. And if you don't make a dean's list your senior year, I'm going to see that you don't graduate." So I made the dean's list.
You mentioned Dr. Simpson. What was your major?
Political science.
It was political science. Right. And who was your advisor?
Grillette Simpson.
It was Grillette Simpson.
Right.
Was he the dean at that point, or
no? He was not. Dr. Simpson. Grillette, not Grillette.
Because Grillette's the one that went on to marry Washington.
Right.
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 And T. Dr. Simpson was.
He was our fraternity advisor and my personal advisor, student advisor. And he was great. He was some kind of good.
At that point, did you do senior projects?
Yes, we did.
Do you remember what yours was on?
Yes, I do.
What was it?
It was on the Vikings landing in the Dismal Swamp.
Okay.
And the funny part about that was Dr. Mabry was my history professor. And so I wrote, there was a man in Suffolk, trying to think of his name now, but anyway, he was a real historian. And he had all this information on the Vikings in the Dismal Swamp, as well as everything else. And so he spent a lot of time with me, and I wrote a complete paper on it. I mean, I did a lot of work on it. And turned it in, and Dr. Mabry, I've forgotten what he gave me on it, but it was a good grade. But he told me, he said, "Curtis, you know good well that Vikings didn't land in the Dismal Swamp." I said, "Well, man convinced me that did anyway." So anyway, about a year later, the Richmond Times-Dispatch came out with about 5 pages of pictures that the Vikings landed in the Dismal Swamp. So, of course, I immediately picked up the phone and called Dr. Mabry, and I said, "Dr. Mabry," he said, "I know who it is." So that was my experience with the Vikings in the Dismal Swamp.
Are y'all familiar with the Dismal Swamp?
That's like Williamsburg, right?
Well, no, it's Suffolk.
Suffolk.
Oh.
Suffolk and Chesapeake in North Carolina, and it has a very large lake in the middle, Lake Drummond, and I forgot, it's thousands of acres.
It is.
And Curtis, as a child, camped out there, and you had an uncle, I had a great uncle who had a cabin down there.
Well, see, Robert Hall Ballard and Bobby Osmond, I used to go down every weekend.
Yeah.
We stayed at the cabin that they stayed in.
Mm-hmm. So he had grown up around the
Yeah.
Dismal Swamp. But I just thought that you might be interested in the fact that he had been around there a lot,
Right.
and that's probably
That explains some of my problems.
Because I've heard stories about you camping down there and sleeping between the railroad tracks. And
Yeah, Calumet Factory Company had a rail. They were cutting timber all down through the swamp, and they had a rail line that went down. It was about 4 feet off the ground, and we used to sleep on that, on the rail, and you could all night long you could get the snakes crawling underneath.
it's pretty famous for the amount of snakes.
Yeah, it's
in
pretty,
there.
it's pretty rugged.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's true camping.
It is that.
And how did you get the job if you weren't, because Dr. Bollington was chemistry, is that right?
Biology. Right.
Speaking of snakes, I understand that he used to employ boys in the summer. He would have them catch lamprey eels.
That's right. That was one of my jobs.
And what are lamprey eels?
Yeah.
What are they?
they'll shock you.
They're
Oh.
horrible little water eels that come up and have like a circular mouth. They lock on to fish, I guess big
Yeah.
fish, and would suck their blood. But they're used. I guess they have like a 3-chambered heart. Their heart is interesting, and so a lot of science
Right.
classes dissect them. And I think I understand that Bowlington would collect them and then put them in formaldehyde or something,
Yeah.
and then sell them to public schools for them to dissect, I guess. But that's what
So
he made
you
them
go
do.
catch-
Isn't that awful?
We used to catch.
How would you
And
catch them?
Of course, there were very few cats in Ashland, Virginia, too.
Because they also ended up as experiments.
Very few.
Where did you catch the eels?
In the river, we would go up.
In the North
Yeah,
End?
yeah.
Ugh, so gross.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't
I
I didn't know they were there.
I've been swimming in the North End many times.
I think you'd feel
Or the
like-
South End. Is it the South End? I would say.
You know, I'm not sure. I used to go with
Well,
him.
South End.
One
There's also
very
the
close.
Little
South
River.
End,
and
I guess it
Monkey
is.
are
I
all
guess
in
it is.
that area. How would you catch them? Like,
Okay, we had nets.
Wow.
We get them with, and you push them in. Push them in the nets.
and then stick them in formaldehyde.
Yeah, well, I let him do that. I didn't do that.
Do you remember any of the other teachers?
Yeah, it was Dr. McConnell who taught social science. And of course, Dr. Simpson taught math. I took practically all of his classes. And Roulette Simpson taught literature as well as I remember. And Dr. Bowen taught Latin. And when I taught Spanish, it was, I can't remember who it was taught Spanish, but he was a very patient man. He told Tom Birdsong and the two of us, he said, I'm going to see that you two get through this class no matter what it takes. Yeah, of course, I remember Dr. Webb.
He was English.
Yeah, right. And
So when you returned from the Marines, you resumed your membership in Phi Delt?
yes, I did.
And did you at that point go to live in the house?
Right.
The fraternity
Yes, I
house?
did.
Was in that fraternity, was it mostly GIs, or were there a mix between GIs and the younger guys?
Most of them had been in service. Right. And then, of course, the younger ones coming in had not, but pledges. But most of the old timers had been in service.
It's like 20 years.
About 4 years.
Yeah. I can imagine that was quite the pledge process.
Yeah, that's right.
Those poor pledges.
I know.
Did you find it difficult did you find you were mostly friends with the former servicemen, or were you?
Oh yeah. Of course, most of us had been there before, and I was trying. One of the boys was a Fisher, was from Northern Neck. Can't think of his name now. Say more that. I wish I could.
Is it Jerry Fisher?
No. There's one named Wendell Lewis, and this boy, you'd know it. I mean, he's been real active up there, but you'd know it if I could ever get. He was in the House of Delegates for a good while. From Northern Neck,
From the Northern Neck.
yeah. Just can't put it together.
Weren't there quite a few students at Randolph-Macon from Suffolk as well?
Quite a few. You had Tom Birdsong and Bernard Godwin and Clarence not Burton, but Clarence Sutton,
Oh.
Jerome Felton, Jimmy Godwin, Frank Cross. There were others there, but I can't call them all. But that was pretty much the main crowd.
How would you travel together to and from Randolph-Macon for vacations and things like that?
Yeah, we had a boy from the beach named Roy Jarrett, who was a dentist.
Yes.
And Roy had a
Had a
Buick.
brother too, didn't he?
Yeah, Al Jarrett.
Yeah.
And Al was a fighter. Well, both of them were fighters. And we used to go back and forth with Roy and his Buick convertible. Of course, he called me one morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we had an old Model A Tom Birdsong. I had one, and he called us, and he had a wreck in that Buick convertible. So I went out there to get him, had blood all over him, and I pulled him out of the car. The first thing he said was, "Get me to a telephone so I can call the insurance man, see if I can get some insurance," he said. Of course, I carried him to the doctor. But he was a character too. But Al and they were both fighters at that time, Roy and Al. And their mother was head of the WCTU,
The temperance.
Temperance.
Oh.
Yeah, their mother was head of the temperance
Really?
thing. And
Women's Christian temperance.
Temperance
Union?
Union,
There you
yeah.
go, yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting too.
That's ironic.
And were the sons active in that as well?
Not very,
I had a feeling.
pretty far from it. And one of the things we used to do going to Suffolk, my father used to go to sleep driving. So
His father, my grandfather, had a bakery and delivered bread in the morning.
And so my father would go to sleep, and I got in the habit of reaching over and grabbing the wheel and kick his foot off the accelerator, and I'd just drive, until finally he'd drop his cigar and he'd come back around. So anyway, what we did was with Roy, we decided we'd have some fun. So Roy would sit up and I'd sit over here beside him. Of course, I'd do the same thing. I'd drive a car, keep my foot on the accelerator. And he would read a newspaper. So these people would come by and almost wreck the car. So that used to entertain us going back.
So what else would you do for fun during those years? I know you were in a fraternity. I imagine there were dances or...
Yeah, we had a real experience that the Randolph-Macon at that particular time had not had any real big time dances. And what we did, we got Charlie Barnett, which y'all never heard of, but anyway, he was a big New York band. So we hired Charlie Barnett to come down to play. And Dr. Terry, who was a Bible professor, and he almost had a heart attack. So anyway, we hired him. So then we got Reynolds Aluminum. Went to see them and talked them into for advertisement doing the whole gym in aluminum foil. And we had a boy from Cortland, Barham, and he later went to New York, became an interior decorator, and he of course directed it all, and he was good, and they had the whole thing done in aluminum foil and with rose trellises and all at the entrances, and everything. It really was pretty. They had pictures and all stuff, and Reynolds really used it.
And this was a big band, like the big bands of
Yeah, that's
Tommy
right.
Dorsey
That's
and that
right.
kind of
That's
thing.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
Where did the women come from? Where'd you find your dates?
They usually came in, and you know, from the different colleges, from West Hampton and Mary Washington and Mary Baldwin. Well, not many from Mary Baldwin, come to think of it, but Mary Washington and
Any from the nursing school at MCV?
not that I remember. There's some from RPI,
Okay.
right? Which is not RPI now, but it was then.
VCU.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was RPI at that time.
But
I
your
won't tell you that
wife,
story.
but your wife went to Mary Baldwin,
Right,
Oh, okay.
right,
but you knew her from Suffolk.
right. That's right,
Okay.
right. And she was Jimmy Godwin's first cousin. It was one of my wrote Tom and Jimmy and Jerome Felton and I were there. Jerome was an interesting character. When he slept with his eyes open. So people would come in, you know, into the apartment, and they'd say, "Where's Jerome?" I said, "He's right there." I said, "Talk to him." You know, he's fast asleep. Eyes pop wide open. He was something else. So that made an interesting thing in the apartment too.
Now, did you live in an apartment at all, or it was
Now
you lived in the fraternity house the whole time?
No, when I came back now, I told you I lived in a fraternity house. I'm wrong, because I lived in the apartments down in Veterans Village, because the fraternity house was full at that time.
And that was just the name you called it, Veterans Village?
Well, that's what we all called it. Yeah,
Okay.
it was Veterans Village.
So it was mostly veterans.
Yeah, Billy Hodges was right behind us, and all
There
that crap.
There were several married couples, and I think
Quite a
some
few.
guys with children too.
Yeah, there were.
In fact, my parents lived
Yeah.
in the married
Ah.
Right.
at one point.
So cute.
We had a real interesting thing to happen too. We had this couple lived right next to us, and we were making homebrew. So we had about six things of that stuff, crocks of that going, and we had put them all. And they had an extra room, so we put it over in her place. That's terrible smelling stuff. So we had to go get it, of course. But we used to keep that going. And Dr. Bowen, who was a real tennis addict, I mean, right up until the day he died. And he would come down, and so one day he was out there playing tennis, and he came over and he said, "Oh, Mr. Saunders," said, "I need something to drink." Said, "Do you have a Coca-Cola or anything like that?" I said, "Dr. Bowen, I don't have. The only thing in the world we got is homebrew." "Well," said, "give me a drink of that." I said, "Yes, sir." So I got him a glass, filled it up, gave it to him, and every day after that, when he played tennis, he came for his homebrew.
Found something better than Coca-Cola.
That's right. That's right. Every day.
Yeah, I'd heard if you played tennis with him, he'd be a little nicer to you
Oh,
in
yeah.
grading
Oh,
your
yeah.
papers.
Oh yeah. Well, he was an interesting character too. And he left the college some money too. When he did that, he had invested in that in the railroad.
In addition to your fraternity, I'm looking at your yearbook. I see that you were the president of the Pan-Hellenic
Right.
group, president of the student body, and a member of the Black Eye. Could you briefly talk about those three organizations?
Well, the student body, of course, was. I mean, president of that was not a hard job at that time, because we had a lot of folks that were real active in the student government. And
were you elected to that position?
yeah, right. There was a boy named Singletary, Bill Singleton, I think it was, and he talked me into it. I wasn't real receptive at that time, because I had enough on my plate. But he talked me into it, and I enjoyed it.
What kind of things would you do? Just
Well, primarily, just talked about the campus activities was the main thing, coordinating, do that, and the honor system and so forth.
And as part of that, your duty there, was that bringing in the band from New York? Was that?
At the Panhellenic Council, right.
Oh, at the Panhellenic,
Yeah.
okay.
But that was not student government.
As student government.
No.
You mentioned an honor system. Was that something that was well known on campus and reinforced?
No,
Okay.
no, it was not well known on campus, but it was it was sort of an unwritten thing, that, and everybody knew that there was such a thing, but it wasn't strictly enforced. But I don't, I can tell you, it's remarkable, but I don't remember any cheating that ever went on while I was there. Any. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. Because I think it's a lot that goes on, but it didn't go on at that then. And the boys that came back from service, they were there to get an education. I mean, they weren't playing around. I mean, it wasn't any joke to them. It was strictly business. They knew they had to buckle down and do what they had to do. So it made it a different atmosphere, really.
how many, you mentioned that before the war there were about 100 students.
Right.
Do you remember how many there were afterwards? I mean, was there a great influx?
Seems like to me there were around 600.
Oh, so that's an enormous jump.
Right.
Did they, well, I guess they built the Veterans Village initially as an Army's barrack, or is that not?
No, it was it might have been built. Now I said that it might have been built for the Army Reserve when they came in. I'm not sure of that, but it was down there on the right hand side, across from Day Field.
Right. It's just still kind of there,
Right.
in a different incarnation
Right.
now. They call it Freshman Village.
Right. But it was a lot of it was a great setup down there when we were there.
So going back to the activities, the Panhellenic Board.
Panhellenic Board was primarily control of the fraternities. I mean, the fraternities working together. That's what that was all about.
And so for this large dance, what other things were there? Intramurals that they?
Yeah, we had a lot of intramurals, fraternity intramurals. Football and basketball and the whole works. But the fraternities worked together real well. I mean, we didn't have, and one of the things the Panhellenic Council was to keep from having any problems between the administration and the fraternities, to hold down those problems.
So there was an administrator on that board as well. Who was the advisor, I guess?
I think Roulette Simpson was. Pretty sure he was.
How many fraternities were at the college at the time? 3 or 4? Or?
Oh, I'd say about 6 or 7.
Okay.
Were
Right.
you in a fraternity?
I was.
Were you find out?
No.
No.
It was much different when I
Yeah.
went to school there. My father and I discussed it at length. I was in the one right next to it, Lambda-Chi.
Okay. And you asked earlier about you played sports, and you said you did not play sports your freshman year. Did you play sports when you got back?
No.
Your dad
My dad played football.
Yeah.
played football,
Right.
So,
They were good then, weren't they?
Yeah, they had a good team.
Yeah,
Had a good team.
The story I always heard about my father going to VMI, he had a scholarship, a football scholarship at VMI. And the story he used to tell me was that they played Randolph-Macon, and you were at Randolph-Macon at the time.
Right.
And he came down with the football team, and you went to him after the game and said, "Do you want to go into Richmond tonight And he said, "You mean you can leave anytime you want?" And he said, "I'm coming here next year." So he then transferred to Randolph-Macon the next year. Now that's probably an oversimplification, but I don't think he was very happy at VMI, and
No,
he
he
loved
wasn't.
Randolph-Macon.
He wasn't. But something real interesting about that homebrew was we had, Tom Birdsong, Jimmy Gavin, the four of us, we had a few homebrews. We had dinner that night at Mary Blackford's. And when we came back from Richmond, we went on into Richmond as soon as we finished dinner. And went to, I forgot what we did, we went to a movie or something. But anyway, when we got back, there were these, everybody was ill. I mean, to tell you, they had the ambulances out there and everything else. I mean, all the guys were just ill. And it never bothered either one of the four of us.
Y'all had built up an immunity.
We were all set. But it was bad. We couldn't figure out what was going on. But Miss Mary evidently got some poison, ptomaine poison or something in the food. But everybody was ill. I mean, they were in bad shape, except us.
Thank goodness for the homebrew.
That's right.
Now, Sarah, you had talked a little bit earlier about being able to afford Randolph-Macon, and I think it's important that you did not grow up in a wealthy household.
No, that's right. That's right.
And so it was really up to you to pay for your
Oh
school.
yeah, I had a few $100s that I'd put aside, but when I got there, I went right straight over and got a job, like I told you, at the cleaning pressing place, and that way I was able to help myself.
Did you have any scholarships or?
No, I don't think there were any scholarships right then. I tell you, things were tough around American then. Everybody was hanging on to, including the college, trying to figure out how they were going to stay in business.
So the students were aware that the college was going through some tough times.
Sure, everybody was. I mean, everybody knew they had to buckle down and work. No question about that.
Well, and the fact that they had lost so many students during the war had a big impact.
They were real concerned about existing. I mean, it was tough, and they picked up that Army Reserve, which really kept them going until the war was over. Right. That's right. So I'm sure it did save them.
And lastly, if you will, because this is in a sense a mystery to us, is the Black Guys. What was that group? Because we see that in all of the yearbooks, but there's no record of them in our archives. We see these wonderful pictures of you with paint on your face, but
well, that was strictly a social group.
What was there? Was there entry into the social group? Was there a way you had to prove your muster?
Yep.
You know where she's headed.
I told you what happened to Tom Birdsong, so I can tell you what that was.
Well, tell us again.
Tom ended up on Phil de Stanislaus' shoulder after the initiation.
So it had to do with that social lubricant.
That's right. That's right.
Again, we come back to homebrew.
No, this was stronger than homebrew.
It was. I've heard people make reference to gin, so that there was a certain.
I don't remember.
You had to prove your love to gin by.
I don't remember the gin.
No.
I remember beer and whiskey, but I don't remember the gin.
What did Black Eye stand for? It's an acronym. Do you know? Did it mean anything, or do you remember if it meant anything?
I don't remember that it meant anything.
How'd you get chosen?
Oh yeah, good.
I guess through friendship.
Yes.
I guess you had to have possibilities.
And the other group was the 11s?
Yeah,
you
the
said?
11 Club.
Okay.
And that was a secret society, is that?
Yeah, there were two groups.
Okay.
They had 11 members, and I think we had 10 or 12. I've forgotten which. 12, I think.
Did you paint your eye? Did you black your eye?
Oh, yeah.
For
We
every
had
party or every dance?
Every dance and
Every
all the
dance.
parties, yeah.
So it wasn't really a secret.
Oh, no, everybody knew who was in it.
But they don't know what
They
they,
don't know
did
the
in it.
rules. Oh.
So at fraternity dances, you blackened your
Oh,
eye?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
When
okay.
you
Yeah.
got punched, there should be a picture in here.
Yeah, all
Oh, I've seen the pictures.
yeah,
Because my father
Was
was
your dad a
one
black
as well.
eye too?
Yeah.
all the social events, you blackened your eye.
When did they get rid of that? It was fairly early. I mean, it was in the early 50s, maybe?
Probably so. Probably so. Yeah, I think
Did it run its course, or did the administration get rid of it?
I think administration was
I think the administration.
brought pressure.
Because Dr. Moreland was not necessarily a great proponent of
Having-
social,
yeah.
social clubs.
Yeah.
He was strictly business. Which made sense.
So, kind of moving on, after you graduated, what did you do? I mean, you graduated with a political science degree in 1948.
Right.
Um,
And then I went into construction business.
it's political in a way.
That's right.
Didn't you at some point go to University of North Carolina?
Oh yeah, that was in the V12. I was there for a year.
That was after Randolph-Macon?
Right.
Okay.
We went from Randolph-Macon to Carolina, and from Carolina to I had forgotten that all about that down to Paris Island.
Okay.
Right.
So you spent a year
At Chapel
Chapel
Hill.
Hill?
after your freshman year
At
at
Randolph-Macon.
Randolph-Macon?
Right.
And what did you study at the University of North Carolina? You said a V12 program? What is that?
Political science.
Oh, so you studied political science there. And did that...
And dated my major professor's daughter.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing.
Was in this case.
So did that transfer into Randolph-Macon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, sure did.
But she didn't.
No. But she entertained all the Randolph-Macon boys after the war. We used to go up at Washington. Her mother was in Congress.
Oh.
And she every time they had a big party, they invited us up. So we'd go up for the parties. I'm making it sound like I didn't do anything but party, but I really did study. I really did study.
Well, now, after you got out of Randolph-Macon, you graduated, didn't you go to work for Benthal Machinery at some point?
Yeah, I stayed there a year, and then I went into construction business.
And
That's
what
right.
did you do at Benthal Machinery?
Field engineering. We
Helping them to develop
We
new
developed the-
peanut.
we developed
Harvest.
the first peanut combine and
Oh, wow.
developed the hay baler, the automatic hay baler. And had an old man named Dolly Holland who was great. I mean, he was really good. So I spent practically that whole year on it in Texas and Oklahoma and Georgia and all that, experimenting with the machine. And then that's when I came back and went into construction business.
And I've heard you tell the story about them wanting you to stay at Benthal Machinery, and something about asking them if they'd fly you over your house at Christmas
No,
so
that
you
was-
could wave or something.
That was Master Harris.
Oh, okay.
A man from Master Harris came to Suffolk and told me this was in 1948. told me, he said he would pay me $25,000 in unlimited expense account if I would do experimental work for Master Harris. They were big farm machinery people. And I asked him, I said, well, all of it sounded too good to be true. So I figured it was. So I asked him, I said, exactly what's going to be my job? And he started telling me. I said, what you're saying is you're going to let me fly over my house every Christmas and wave. He said, that's about it. I said, thank you, just saying. So then I went on construction business. And I've been in that since 1951.
In Suffolk the whole time?
Lived in Suffolk,
Okay.
right. But actually, I was in Portsmouth and Chesapeake and Virginia Beach in construction.
And you've done other things as well in terms of development and developing subdivisions and various other.
And we're in the wetlands business. I don't know if you ever read about that or not. But wetlands banks, that's Johnson said that there'd never be any less wetlands in the United States than there are now, than there were at that time. Mm-hmm. And so any place that you destroy in the wetlands, you have to replace it. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we have banks. And I counted up the other day and we had 10,000 acres. So we got a lot of banks.
So you flooded land so people can buy that from you as mitigation for wetlands that they're destroying.
That's right.
So you've created wetlands to offset.
Right.
And now where are they? Where are you creating them?
One is right down, two of them in Deep Creek. One is
right near the Dismal Swamp.
Yeah. One of the other one is actually on the edge of the Dismal Swamp, down at the old, what we call the old feeder ditch going into Lake Drummond on 17, going down toward Elizabeth City. And the other one is down at Columbia, North Carolina, which is about 40 miles west of Manio, right in the swamp, right on 64. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we got 4,300 acres there.
Oh, wow.
So that's a big bank. And we've sold credits primarily to the state down there, state of North Carolina.
And what are they doing with it? Building highways? Or?
Yeah, what they do is they're widening 64 all the way from Raleigh to Manio. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, they have to destroy some wetlands along the way. And they buy credits from us for that, which is an interesting thing.
Now, since you graduated, in what ways have you sort of stayed connected with the college? I understand you're good friends with a lot of your former classmates. And
right.
Did you participate in any of your reunions or? Oh
yeah, I go back fairly often, a couple of times a year probably. That boy's name is Walter Fiddler.
Oh, Walter, yeah.
That's right.
He lives out in Sharp.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was one of our fraternity brothers.
Yeah, he was a Phi Delta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So finally came to me.
Yeah. And your father was particularly active after graduation.
He was very much so.
In the Alumni Association, was president. And,
that's on the board of trustees.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Did you, that kind of finishes our basic list of questions, if you don't mind if I ask just a few more sort of out of curiosity. Sure. What did you think when your old classmate Dr. White became president? Was that?
I was very pleased, but that turned out to be it didn't turn out good for me for a simple reason. My son Sandy went to Randolph-Macon, and he when he got up there, his Luther White was a fraternity brother of mine, was president. Randy Jones was a real close friend of mine, and Randy he was running into Randy all the time, and there were about 4 or 5 people that on the staff around Macon that were looking at him every day.
Oh.
And so after his first year, he said, "Hey, I got to go." And Luther understood. He understood what all it was about. But Bobby was real active, my brother was real active at Randolph-Macon. And when I started, I did serve on the alumni board there for a while. But then I got involved in, as you well know, president of the Asphalt Association, Virginia Asphalt Association, a couple of times, and president of Virginia Road Builders, and on the board of the National Asphalt Association. All that stuff took time, plus trying to run a business. And I just got so involved, I kind of dropped out, keeping up around Macon like I should have.
Well, Dad was closer to.
Oh, yeah,
he lived
he was
in
in
Richmond,
Richmond,
and my father retired at 55, so he had more
Right.
time available to spend up there at Randolph-Macon. And he loved Randolph-Macon.
Oh, he really did.
He thought it was the greatest school ever.
We do too, but we're a bit partial.
But anything in the world you want to ask, I'll be glad to try to answer. But I don't.
Without giving away too many secrets.
Well, not too many that we had, really.